My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 30 years old, a marketing consultant, and an outsider in my own family. That year, I had just left my father's investment firm to start my own business, a decision my family saw as nothing short of betrayal. But I still held on to hope that one day they would understand. That Thanksgiving, I decided to go back home to Beacon Hill. Not to prove anything, not to reclaim a place. I just missed them. I missed my mother's cranberry glazed turkey. I missed my father slicing the pecan pie, his favorite, the one he always said only I could make like Grandma used to. And deep down, I believed that maybe, just maybe, a pie could reopen a door that had once been closed. I stayed up the night before, baking Grandma's pecan pie from scratch. The crust golden and crisp, the filling rich and buttery, sweetened with brown sugar and memory. I wrapped it carefully. I even brought along a bottle of red wine, gifted to me by my very first client when I launched my own firm. I chose my outfit with intention, the same one my mother once called mature but not too old. Hair pulled back, light makeup. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard, but I wanted them to see that I hadn't given up. As I turned onto Chestnut Street, something felt off. Caroline's car was already there. So was Rachel Stevens, my best friend for the last 10 years. Neither had told me they were coming early, but I brushed off the unease. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. I walked up to the familiar wooden door, holding the pecan pie with both hands, heart full of hope. Through the window, I could see candlelight flickering, hear classical music playing, and laughter rising from the dining room. I rang the bell. My heart pounded. The laughter stopped. Footsteps approached. And then the door opened. My parents stood there. Richard, his eyes cold as steel. Margaret, her lips pressed tight, face unreadable. "What are you doing here?" my father asked, his voice devoid of warmth. I stood frozen. "You said dinner started at 6," I replied, trying to steady my voice. "I brought the pecan pie." My mother gripped the door frame. "I think you misunderstood. You weren't invited this year," she said softly, each word slicing deeper than any scream could. I looked past them, saw Caroline in her wine-red dress, saw Rachel Stevens sitting in the very seat I used to claim every Thanksgiving. Both of them saw me. Neither stood up. Rachel, the girl who once held my hand through nights I couldn't breathe, just looked down, avoiding my eyes. I tried to smile. "I brought the pie, Dad's favorite." My father shook his head. "It's not necessary. We already have dessert." No explanation, no apology, just a look, like I was some stranger knocking on the wrong door. I turned away, back straight. I had promised myself I wouldn't cry in front of them, but when I got into my car, placing the pie gently on the passenger seat, I knew this wasn't a moment of anger. This was an execution, planned, cold, final. And I realized that door didn't close because I changed. It closed because I refused to keep living a lie, refused to look the other way, refused to be complicit in what I knew was wrong. They didn't just shut me out of dinner. They erased me from the family. What I didn't know then was that the moment they slammed that door was the moment I began opening another, one that would lead me to uncover a truth they had buried for years, a truth I would bring into the light. Have you ever stood in front of a door you knew by heart, only to be turned away when all you wanted was to be loved? Have you ever tried to fix what's broken, only to be betrayed by the very people you trusted most? If you have, you're not alone, because this story, Amayi, is only just beginning. If you've ever been shut out of a place that was supposed to be your home, stay with me. The truth I'm about to reveal might make you realize sometimes to truly find yourself, you have to lose everything first. Like this video if you've ever felt excluded or unseen. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter where I expose everything they tried to keep buried. I'm Claire Morgan, and this is the story they never wanted me to tell. I grew up in a grand house on Beacon Hill, surrounded by oak-paneled walls and crystal chandeliers polished so perfectly you could see your own doubts reflected back at you. Every room looked like it belonged on the cover of a luxury home magazine, and from a young age, I learned one thing with painful clarity. Not everything was allowed to break, especially not the image of the Morgan family. My father, Richard Morgan, was the embodiment of financial power in Boston. The founder of Morgan Capital, a prestigious investment firm he built from scratch with nothing but a Princeton degree and unshakable ambition. To the outside world, he was a symbol, disciplined, untouchable, a man who didn't fail. But at home, he was a living doctrine. Success was mandatory, emotion was a weakness, and anything less than excellence was a quiet disgrace. My mother, Margaret, was the mirror image of social perfection. She never raised her voice, never seemed flustered, and not a single strand of her hair ever fell out of place. She commanded charity galas, art auctions, and cocktail parties like a general in pearls. To me, she felt less like a mother and more like a blueprint. Cold, poised, and built to control, not comfort. I still remember the day I scraped my knee at 8, blood dripping, tears streaming. She knelt down, wiped it with a silk handkerchief, and said, "Chin up, Claire. A Morgan girl doesn't cry in public." My older sister, Caroline, never needed reminders like that. From an early age, she understood her role. Get top grades, say the right things, walk like the world was watching. Because in our world, it always was. She got into Harvard Business School without a second thought, joined Morgan Capital right after graduation, and quickly became the daughter my father boasted about to every journalist within earshot. And me? I was the inconvenience in that carefully written script. I didn't go to Harvard. I chose Boston University because that's where I could study branding and marketing. The things I'd been obsessed with since I was a kid, drawing fake logos on notebook margins. My father once stared at my diploma like it was a toy from a cereal box, set it down silently, and said nothing. At dinner one night, in front of a table full of guests, he finally broke the silence. "I thought you'd aim higher than slogans and color palettes," he said, with a strained smile I'll never forget. I didn't argue, not because I agreed, but because I understood the rules. In my family, reacting too strongly was weakness. Emotions had to be managed. Desires had to be translated into strategic returns. I learned to stay silent at the dinner table, to nod even when I disagreed, to smile even when my heart was begging me to scream. It wasn't submission, it was survival in the world of the Morgans. Even so, I joined Morgan Capital exactly as he wanted, but I wasn't placed in investment or strategy. He assigned me to the marketing department as if it were a favor, a harmless sandbox where the youngest daughter could stay out of the way. I worked relentlessly. I wanted to prove that marketing wasn't fluff. It was strategic. It was essential. But to him, I was still the daughter who took the scenic route. I remember vividly the day I brought in a major new client, a Manhattan real estate development fund. I spent weeks crafting their brand, designing their communications strategy, preparing every deliverable. When the contract was finally signed, I brought the folder to my father's office. He flipped through a few pages, looked up, and said, "Well, at least you did something useful." No thank you, no proud look. And as I turned to leave, I heard him tell his assistant, "Have Caroline come in. We'll need someone with real financial sense to handle this." I had lived in my sister's shadow my entire life. Caroline was the one people turned to for insight. I was the one they called when they needed someone to arrange the press kit. And Rachel Stevens, my so-called best friend, was loved by my family more than I ever was. She had that kind of smile, that polished charm that made people trust her instantly. She was gracious in a way that made my mother once say at a party, "If only Claire were a little more like Rachel, I'd sleep better at night." Rachel joined Morgan Capital 2 years after I did. I was the one who recommended her, the one who took her to lunch on her first day, the one who helped rewrite her resume when she wasn't confident, the one who walked her through every early step in this cold, calculating world of finance. But within months, she knew everyone. They trusted her. She got invited into meetings I was excluded from. At first, I chalked it up to talent. I wasn't jealous, I just felt left behind, like I was a flawed thread in an otherwise flawless silk. The most painful part was, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. I still remembered those late nights, Rachel and I huddled in my tiny apartment, splitting a cold pizza, talking about dreams and independence. She once held my hand when I broke down after being humiliated in an internal meeting. She had looked me in the eyes and said, "Claire, one day you're gonna own this game." And I believed her. I believed that friendship could rise above comparison, that at the very least, she was the one person who didn't treat me like I was excess baggage in my own life. I was wrong. Over those years, I tasted every flavor of dismissal, being underestimated, labeled as not cut out for the family legacy, and worst of all, treated like a background character in the story of my own life. Still, I tried. I endured. I accepted being in the shadows because I clung to the belief that family was irreplaceable. But in the Morgan world, even love had terms and conditions. And those terms, you had to be someone they could proudly present, without tarnishing the spotless reputation etched into the company's boardroom walls. There are moments you never forget, not because they're loud or violent or shatter you all at once, but because they're so silent, so cold, that they freeze time, like the sound of a door quietly closing behind you. No slam, no lock, just the quiet truth that it'll never open again. For me, that moment began with a document, a seemingly ordinary client asset report sent to the marketing department ahead of a brand strategy presentation. I was the one assigned to review and edit it, like always, but something was off. The cash flow didn't add up. The reported growth didn't align with market behavior, and there were transfers, large ones, to entities with vague names that screamed offshore shell companies. Cayman Islands, Panama. No clear explanations, no stated business purposes, just strings of numbers and silence. I checked 3 times, pulled the original data, rebuilt the report line by line, and then I brought it to my father, Richard Morgan. I placed the stack of documents on his desk. I didn't speak right away. I waited for him to look at me. He didn't. He simply exhaled, like I was wasting his time. I need you to confirm these figures, I said calmly. He flipped through a few pages and paused. His expression didn't change, but I saw it. He knew. There was no surprise, no confusion, just irritation that I had seen what I wasn't supposed to. These accounts are handled directly by me, he said, his voice ice cold. You don't need to concern yourself. But if a client asks, I said, he interrupted, you're in marketing. You handle what's visible. Internal matters are handled by those with the proper expertise. So, expertise means adjusting numbers to look better? I asked, not to challenge him. I genuinely wanted to know if he saw anything wrong with it. He looked at me for the first time during that entire exchange. His eyes weren't angry, just tired. Tired that I dared to question him. Stephanie, he began, then paused, corrected himself. Claire, don't overstep your place. After that conversation, everything changed. Quietly, subtly, like the air being sucked out of a room, one breath at a time. Before, I had access to internal data to align branding with strategy. Now, every login attempt returned, access denied. Files were tagged as restricted. Suddenly, my job description had shrunk overnight. I emailed the tech team. Their response was short. As directed by upper management, I asked my father's assistant. She shrugged, avoiding my eyes. Could be part of some internal restructuring. But I knew. I knew exactly what it was. They didn't want me seeing anything else. In meetings, Caroline, my sister, started showing up more. She sat in my chair, gave presentations in my place, answered questions meant for me. No one said I was being replaced, but slowly I became a prop in my own professional life. I still showed up on time, sat at my desk, but everything had changed. I was no longer invited to strategy briefings, removed from internal task forces, excluded even from casual lunch meetings where real decisions were made. One time, I walked into a conference room only to find the meeting had already started without me. Caroline glanced up and smiled, as if to say, "You're no longer needed." I pulled Rachel aside later, the person I still thought of as my closest friend. Rachel Bestimbiayul hadn't vanished entirely yet. She still made small talk, still sent me funny memes during breaks, still invited me out for coffee. But something had shifted. Her tone was different. The spark was gone. The honesty dimmed. Maybe Richard's just reorganizing a bit, she said, gently spinning her latte. Don't worry, Claire. Maybe they're just streamlining things. I don't think that's it, I said quietly. I think something's being covered up. She didn't respond right away, just stared out the window for a long time, then finally turned back with a tight smile. Claire, sometimes it's better to just focus on your role and not dig too deep. It sounded harmless, even protective, but inside something broke. Rachel had never spoken to me like an outsider, but now she was keeping her distance, polite, professional, intentional. After that day, she started fading from our one-on-one meetups. Her replies came slower. Her gaze avoided mine more often. And then, in a client presentation, one I was supposed to lead, I was replaced by Rachel. No warning. I only realized it when I walked into the room and saw her standing at the front, presenting slides I had written. Caroline sat at the head of the table, her eyes grazing past me like I was just another intern. No one apologized, no one explained, and I didn't ask. I just took the last seat at the table, listening as Rachel delivered every word I'd written, only now in a voice that wasn't mine, confident, polished, perfectly rehearsed. When the meeting ended, I stayed behind to pack up my laptop. Rachel approached, her voice low. Claire, I'm sorry if it felt like you were sidelined. I was just following orders. And you didn't think I deserved a heads up? I asked. She said nothing, then turned and walked away. I watched her leave, and the figure walking out of that room wasn't the same girl who used to lie on the floor beside me, dreaming about breaking into finance. Wasn't the one who cried with me after being unfairly yelled at by a manager. Wasn't the one who used to call me at midnight to pitch some crazy marketing idea. The woman leaving that room was someone chosen, a more compliant version of Caroline, composed, articulate, easy to manage, and most of all, uncurious. I started staying late, not out of workload, but because I dreaded going home to an empty apartment, haunted by questions no one would answer. In those late hours, I began revisiting old files, trying to piece together what was happening. I started backing everything up, saving documents to a personal drive, encrypting them, annotating them. I stopped trusting anyone. Every email felt suspect, every update filtered, and I wasn't even sure if I'd still have my desk the next morning. Whitman Development, one of the largest real estate conglomerates in the Northeast, had been my father's obsession for nearly a decade. I still remember him bringing up their name at family dinners, like it was the final trophy he needed to claim in order to cement Morgan Capital's dominance. He tried everything: proposals, golf outings, even orchestrating an entire charity gala just to shake Robert Whitman's hand under the perfect chandelier. Every attempt failed. Whitman refused to partner, dismissing Morgan Capital as rigid, outdated, and disturbingly opaque. Those words made my father seethe. And then it was me, Claire Morgan, the daughter he claimed understood nothing about finance, who closed the deal. No power plays, no lavish dinners, just an honest conversation during a marketing conference in Chicago, where I gave a talk on brand strategy for legacy corporations. I had no idea Robert Whitman was in the front row, quietly taking notes. 3 weeks later, he called me. He said he wanted a new team, not to manage money, but to manage perception. You're the only person at Morgan Capital who sounded like she actually had her own voice, he told me. I barely slept for 10 days. I poured myself into it: market analysis, brand repositioning, visual identity. It felt like the first time I was doing work that fit me, not the legacy I was forced to wear. When the plan was approved, I knew it wasn't just a contract, it was my answer. I brought the entire proposal to my father's office and placed it on his desk myself. I just signed Whitman, I said, and for the first time in years, I didn't lower my eyes in his presence. Richard Morgan flipped through the pages, slowly, silently. His face gave away nothing. I had hoped, foolishly maybe, that just once he'd look up, nod, and say he was proud. He didn't. Instead, he closed the folder and asked, "What did you promise him?" I froze. "Excuse me?" What did you offer to earn his trust? Equity, control, or was it just one of your marketing gimmicks? My voice trembled. I didn't promise anything. I did my job. I built a strategy he believed in. Your job, he repeated, his voice low and razor sharp, is to serve the interests of this family, not build a personal brand on the back of Morgan Capital. I let out a bitter laugh. So I'm not part of this family? He didn't answer. He just looked at me the way you might look at a child who doesn't yet understand how the world works. 2 weeks later, I handed in my resignation. No notice, no explanatory email, no farewell lunch. I submitted a handoff file to admin, returned my access badge, and walked out of Morgan Capital through the side door. No one even looked up. 3 days later, I filed paperwork to start my own company, Morgan Marketing Consultancy. I knew the name would make my father furious, but I didn't choose it to cling to something. I chose it to reclaim it. The Morgan name doesn't just belong to those who can manipulate numbers. It belongs to those who keep their word, who see human value, and who listen. I worked out of a small apartment in Cambridge. The living room doubled as a conference room, the kitchen, my coffee bar for clients. I didn't have a long list of accounts, but I had trust, and I had myself. Weeks after I publicly announced my departure from the family firm, the silence began to harden. My mother, Margaret, never called back, even after I left 3 voicemails. She didn't even send a text. A week later, I received a postcard. No greeting, no closing, just a single line in her immaculate handwriting. If this is the path you've chosen, then you must bear its consequences. Caroline, my sister, sent me an email so cold it could have been generated by a machine. I hope you understand that your behavior constitutes betrayal, not just of the family, but of the reputation of Morgan Capital. You will no longer have access to any company data. A few days later, I received a formal legal warning from the company's attorney, signed by my father himself. They accused me of misappropriating client information, breaching internal confidentiality, and strongly implied that they would sue if I attempted to leverage any relationships formed during my time at the firm. I handed the file to my personal lawyer, a friend from college. After reading it, he sat in silence for a long moment before looking up at me. Claire, they know you didn't do anything wrong. This is just an intimidation tactic. They want you to back down. I smiled faintly. I don't have anywhere left to back down to. Only one person stayed in touch with me, Sophie Bennett, my cousin, Uncle David's daughter. Sophie wasn't in finance. She taught American literature at a public high school, and she was the only person in my entire family who called just to ask, "Are you okay?" We met at a small cafe near her school. She brought a box of homemade cookies, placed them gently on the table, and said, "You're not alone, even if it feels like it." She told me that within the family, I was now being spoken about as a two-faced traitor, someone who had bit the hand that fed her. But Sophie had known something wasn't right for a while. She'd overheard Uncle David whispering nervously with an outside attorney. She'd once seen Caroline printing financial documents at midnight, documents that didn't match what was officially recorded. Now, Sophie said she didn't believe I betrayed anyone. She believed I finally chose to live honestly. I sat there listening, a lump rising in my throat. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I hadn't been completely erased. like I still existed somewhere outside of their silence. My little company slowly started gaining clients. Not many, but enough. A few local brands, a family run dental clinic, even a vegan restaurant owned by a gay couple who said they picked me because they felt I wouldn't judge them. I didn't judge. I knew exactly what it felt like to be judged. Every day, I woke up in a modest apartment, brewed my own coffee, wrote my own ad copy, sent my own quotes. But I also woke up with a freedom I'd never known in the first 30 years of my life. No more sitting up straight at dinner so my mother wouldn't glare at me. No more quietly correcting slides so Caroline wouldn't scold me. No more fake smiles when my father said I was only good for writing slogans. I didn't need anyone's permission to be myself. And in that silence, I began to hear the sound I had longed for all my life, the sound of courage, and the first whisper of resistance, quiet, fragile, but enough to start rewriting the story they had spent years trying to bury. In my family, Thanksgiving wasn't just a meal, it was a ritual, an unspoken sermon about order, legacy, and fixed roles in a dynasty built on ambition and pride. My mother, Margaret, would start planning in mid-October. She'd select tablecloths from her once-a-year collection, order flowers in season-appropriate tones, and vet the menu with the chef like she was directing a Broadway production. Every dish had to be traditional, each ingredient sourced from a specific vendor, every plate set exactly as laid out in the table diagram she'd sketched weeks in advance. I used to love those Thanksgivings as a child because for a few rare hours, we could pretend to be a normal family, eating together, laughing, retelling old stories as if we weren't drowning in secrets, rivalries, and bitterness. That year, I still made a pecan pie, my father's favorite. Using my grandmother's recipe, I stayed up all night baking it, not because I thought it would change anything, but because it was the one part of the memory I still had control over, the one thing they hadn't taken from me yet. A week before the holiday, I called my mother. As usual, I'll arrive at 6, right? I asked. There was a brief pause before she replied, yes, and this time, dress appropriately. Just one sentence, cold as steel. But I was used to it. In my family, the most important messages were always tucked into casual remarks that seemed harmless, unless you knew how to read them. I picked out an outfit my mother had once approved of, applied light makeup, and pinned my hair in the style she preferred. Every detail was calculated, not to win them back, but to leave them no excuse to turn me away. I arrived 10 minutes early. In my hands was a still warm pecan pie, wrapped in a linen cloth and tied with a ribbon. I also brought a bottle of Cabernet, a gift from a recent client, a small token of the life I had started to build on my own. I stepped up the stone steps of the house on Chestnut Street, the home I used to belong to, the same steps where I'd sat for hours as a child, waiting for my mother to return from the market, waiting for Caroline to walk me to school, waiting for someone to open the door and look at me like I was part of them. Through the glass pane, I saw candlelight flickering, heard soft classical music playing, smelled roasted turkey wafting through the air. I rang the doorbell. The laughter inside stopped. The door opened. My parents stood there. Richard Morgan in a navy suit with a traditional striped tie. Margaret in a pale gray dress, wearing the diamond earrings passed down from my grandmother. They said nothing for a few seconds. Then my father spoke, voice flat and dry. "What are you doing here?" I tried to smile, holding up the pie like a child offering a perfect test score. "I came for dinner. Mom said 6 o'clock." My mother didn't meet my eyes. "There's been a change. You're not invited this year." I thought I'd misheard. I looked past them, saw Caroline seated at the table, glass of wine in hand, laughing with someone I didn't immediately recognize. And then I saw her, Rachel Stevens, sitting in the exact spot I'd occupied for 20 Thanksgivings. She turned away when our eyes met. I whispered, "But I brought pie. It's Dad's favorite." My father frowned. "No need. Dessert's already been taken care of." No invitation to step inside. No hesitation. No one stood up. I stood there still holding the pie, which had begun to cool in my arms. A neighbor walked past, glanced at me, then quickly looked away. I turned and slowly walked down the stone steps, head high, back straight, but inside something shattered. I didn't cry, not while I was still there. I got into the car, set the pie gently on the passenger seat. Through the windshield, I saw my father draw the curtain closed. The sounds resumed, the clinking of glasses, the laughter, the music, as if I had never stood there at all. I looked back at the house once more. The brass plaque on the wall gleamed under the porch light. "Family first." I let out a breath, half laugh, half gasp. It didn't leave my throat, but it trembled in my chest. Bitter, knowing, family, as long as you didn't ask questions, didn't cause discomfort, didn't expose the cracks. I drove off, nowhere specific. Eventually, I found myself along the banks of the Charles River. The Charles at night always held a kind of sorrow, not the weeping kind, but the quiet despair of things broken long ago and never rebuilt. The river reflected the pale yellow lights of distant buildings. The wind cut through my coat like it wanted to strip away whatever I was still holding on to. I sat in the car, hands still on the steering wheel, my body frozen in place, not from the cold, but from the hollow feeling of being emptied out. There was nothing left to cling to, no place to return to. They had done it, exactly the way they always did with anyone who endangered the family image. Deny, erase, shut the door. No yelling, no argument, just a glance, a sentence, a turned back. I looked to the passenger seat, where the pie still rested, its golden crust baked with every ounce of effort I had, the linen cloth chosen from my mother's old collection, the ribbon tied by hand, as if some piece of the past could still be salvaged. I laughed, a laugh without sound, just broken breath. I had never felt more unnecessary. And then I thought of Michael Stone. Michael had once sat beside me in Econ 203 back in college, those days when we were still naive and dreaming. He later joined the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, where investigations often started with what looked like nothing, a strange figure, a questionable transfer. We had run into each other at an alumni event. I didn't say much that night, but when he asked about my work at Morgan Capital, I let slip a trace of doubt. Just one offhand comment. "I've seen things. That don't feel right." Michael had gone quiet. Then he handed me his business card. It had a personal number, not the office line, and just one sentence. "If the day ever comes when you decide not to stay quiet, call me." I had kept that card in my wallet for nearly a year, not because I believed I'd use it, but because I hadn't been ready. Now I had no choice. I pulled out my wallet, retrieved the card, its corner now slightly bent, and dialed the number. 3 rings, then a pickup. I heard background noise, kids, dishes, someone cooking. Michael Stone? I drew a deep breath. It's Claire Morgan. A beat of silence. Then, Claire, are you okay? No, I said, but I think it's time. Michael's voice dropped, sharp and clear. Do you have something? Internal documents, copies of transactions, some altered reports, and bank records, transfers from shell funds. I heard him step away, probably into a quieter room. Are you sure you want to go through with this? I looked out toward the skyline, those tall buildings still glowing in the distance. Morgan Capital might have been hosting a client dinner, or maybe a private party. They could have been talking about me, like a name already erased. Everything I ever had, ever believed in, ever tried to protect. They've destroyed it all. I said slowly, I have nothing left to lose. Michael didn't press. Meet me tomorrow, 8 a.m., Cafe Danton, South End. Bring everything. Be careful. Tell no one. I nodded, even though he couldn't see. Thank you, Michael. No thanks needed. Just know this. After tomorrow, everything changes. You could become a witness. You might be investigated. And one thing is certain, there's no going back. I gave a faint, bitter smile. Nothing's the same anymore anyway. I hung up. The silence in the car became suffocating. The heater had stopped humming. No music, just me, and a rage that no longer screamed, but had frozen into ice. That night, I didn't go home right away. I drove to my small office, unlocked the door, turned on the lights. The stacks of documents I'd kept since leaving the company, never because I had a plan, but because I couldn't forget, were still in the metal cabinet. I pulled out a chair, opened my laptop, and began sorting through every file. Every spreadsheet, every number, every transaction was a fragment of a truth someone had tried to bury. I remembered those late nights at Morgan Capital when I quietly saved reports to my personal drive, not because I meant to blow the whistle, but because something inside me felt wrong, like I was walking across thin ice, and one crack could bring it all down. I took photos of the printed documents, organized them by date, flagged suspicious transactions. I found a report I had originally submitted, transparent, well documented, and a later version adjusted by the finance department. Profits had magically increased by 17%. An unexplained expense had vanished. I also found the names of shell companies, Galleon Holdings, Trinity Edge Ventures, Westbrook Asset Group, all with no websites, no listed addresses, yet showing up in offshore transfers. One of them bore the signature of Richard Morgan. I paused at that familiar signature, bold, sharp strokes. For years, it had symbolized power. Now, it looked like a smear of ink on whatever honor was left. I saved everything to an external hard drive, backed it up again to an encrypted cloud, labeled the printed folders, placed them into my bag. Before leaving the office, I stood in front of the glass door, looked at my reflection, a thinner face from sleepless nights, dark circles under tired eyes, hair neatly pulled back, a plain coat, no trace left of the girl who once sat in Morgan Capital's boardroom, wearing silk scarves and offering curated smiles. Claire Morgan, the daughter of Richard, was gone. All that remained was me, the woman who was about to uncover everything. I arrived home around 3 a.m. The apartment was quiet, save for the soft whine of wind outside the window. I placed the bag on the table, turned on the heater, poured myself a glass of water, and then I sat down, closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to remember what this moment felt like right before everything began. Before the investigation, the confrontations, the subpoenas, the headlines, the moment before the storm. Because by tomorrow morning, I would no longer be the keeper of secrets. I would be the one to expose them. Cafe Danton sat quietly in a tucked-away corner of South End, an old Boston neighborhood where the red brick buildings still carried the weary charm of another era. No flashy signs, no tourists, just a few locals, scattered like ghosts trying to hide from chapters of their own lives. I arrived at 7:50 a.m., clutching a black leather satchel filled with a hard drive, printed files, and encrypted backups. Every step from the parking lot to that worn wooden door felt twice as long, not because I was tired, but because I knew once I walked through it, there'd be no turning back. Michael was already there, a table by the window, still the same blue button-down shirt, no tie, chestnut hair neatly combed like back in college. But the eyes, they'd changed. No more boyish gleam, no more teasing glint, just the steady wariness of a man who'd read too many classified reports and heard too many lies. "Claire," he said, rising to shake my hand. The grip was firm, professional, no emotion. Exactly what you'd expect from someone trained to keep distance, even from the past. I sat down, unlocked my bag, pulled out the hard drive and a clear folder packed with printed documents. Michael didn't rush. He ordered a black tea for me, then leaned forward, voice low and measured. "Before you hand me anything, there are 3 things you need to understand." I nodded. 1, if this goes forward, you may be called as a witness. That means everything, your history, your job, your ties to the Morgan family will be scrutinized, even things you'd rather forget. I met his eyes. I understand. 2, if this is as serious as it looks, they won't sit quietly. They'll lawyer up, launch PR campaigns, maybe even investigate you in return. You should expect to be smeared, threatened, abandoned by people you once called friends. I thought of Caroline, of Rachel, of my mother. They had already abandoned me, long before I ever spoke a word. They erased me from their lives before I even dared to speak the truth. I said, "There's nothing left for them to take." Michael gave a quiet nod. 3, if we launch a case, I can't protect you as a friend. I'll follow protocol. You won't be able to control the process. And once you're in, you can't back out. My mouth was dry. A wave of cold surged through my chest. Not fear, but the clarity that comes when you realize the path you're walking now is yours alone. "I don't want out," I said quietly. "I just want them to stop burying everything that's right." Michael said nothing more. He opened his laptop, connected the hard drive, and started scrolling through folders. I watched him silently. The furrow in his brow deepened with every file. His eyes sharpened with each transaction. After 10 minutes, he paused on a wire transfer from 2022, $3.5 million from Morgan Capital to an offshore firm in the Cayman Islands. "Galleon Holdings," he murmured, eyes still fixed on the screen. "I've seen this name before. It came up in a blocked investigation. The whistleblower stopped cooperating." I nodded. That company was listed in one of Caroline's off-the-books trackers. I found the spreadsheet, encrypted, but she saved a version on an unprotected internal drive. Michael turned to me. This is enough to trigger a preliminary investigation, but if you have something stronger, proof of intent, of someone knowingly approving illegal activity, it becomes a criminal case. I pulled out the printed file. Inside, a single photocopied email, initialed by my father, Richard Morgan. Approved transfer per Caroline's request. Ensure this is omitted from quarterly reports. Delegate accounting to a third party. Michael read it. For nearly a full minute, he said nothing. Then he exhaled and set it down. Idiots, or maybe just arrogant. They never thought someone in the family would talk. It's not betrayal, I said softly. It's refusing to keep pretending. He closed his laptop. If this checks out, we're looking at a federal case. My fingers tightened around my cup. My voice caught in my throat. Can you protect me? Michael's eyes softened just slightly. I can't protect you like a brother, but I can follow the law. And I won't let you stand alone. I nodded. That was all I needed to hear. This won't be fast, he said. I'll submit everything to internal affairs. Someone will reach out to you. No email, no calls. In person only. Until then, keep it all confidential, not even your cousin. I pressed my lips together, thinking of Sophie, the only one still reaching out, the one who once brought me a tin of cookies, a quiet gesture of empathy. I didn't want to drag her into this. I understand, I said softly. We stood. Michael didn't hug me, didn't pat my shoulder. He just gave a nod, the kind of nod that carries trust without sentiment, without the need for words. I stepped out of the cafe just as the sun rose above the distant row of buildings. Light cut through the morning mist, glinting off dew-soaked bricks like a silver thread pulled across the past. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I felt like I was walking forward, even if the road ahead was a storm. The first sign didn't come from the press. It came from a closed financial forum where analysts and investors quietly passed around whispers like cracks spreading across the surface of an unbreakable lake. A 3:17 a.m. anonymous post. Morgan Capital may be under informal investigation by the SEC for undisclosed offshore dealings. Expect turbulence in the coming weeks. 3 hours later, a niche finance blog picked it up as unconfirmed speculation. By noon, major financial outlets were circling the story. No one mentioned my name, but anyone who mattered would understand, and every Morgan absolutely would. That morning, I woke up to a phone full of messages, not from journalists, not from colleagues, from family. The first text was from Caroline, just 4 words, no punctuation. What did you just do? The next one, Claire, do you even realize how many people this will affect? Dad is furious. Mom hasn't slept all night. Do you really want to be the one who ruins everything? I didn't respond. I didn't delete them. I just stared at the screen as each line arrived, like dull, familiar knives slicing open memories I'd long sealed shut. The first call came from an unknown number. I let it ring out. Then came the voicemail. Claire, it's your mother. Please call me, please. Her voice was hoarse but composed. Still Margaret Morgan, the woman who could pour acid into a sentence and deliver it like a lullaby. second call, my father. I didn't answer. His message was brief. You don't understand what you're doing. This isn't a game. The third call left no message, but I knew it was Rachel. I turned my phone off, placed it face down on the table. Silence now was the only armor I had left. That day, I didn't leave the apartment. I brewed a pot of tea, opened my laptop, and checked the news. The financial ledger's headline read, Morgan Capital suspected in offshore shell company network. SEC declines to comment. I read every word slowly. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel satisfied. I felt hollow. Maybe because I knew this was just the overture. That evening, when the sunlight outside had faded to a last pink streak across the sky, I received a message I didn't expect from William Morgan, my uncle. Growing up, Uncle William was the only one in the family who never told me to be more like Caroline. He lived apart, a reclusive figure the Morgans referred to with disdain as the family's quiet shame. He never worked for Morgan Capital. A retired philosophy professor, he chose a life in rural Vermont, raising bees and writing obscure essays. Every holiday, he sent handwritten cards, but never showed up. My family saw it as silent betrayal. His message arrived at 5:23 p.m. I don't know what you're carrying, but I've seen that darkness, and I know what it feels like to stand alone. If you ever need to talk, just say the word, not for the story, just because you're Claire. I read it again and again. No theatrics, no platitudes. But for the first time in years, I felt seen, not as Richard Morgan's daughter, not as the difficult one, not as the former employee, just Claire. I didn't reply, not right away. I just placed my hand on the phone screen as if somehow I could touch something that hadn't yet rotted in a world that had long since collapsed. That evening, I received an anonymous email. No clear address, just a single line. They know it's you. Be careful. I didn't feel fear, just cold. A cold that didn't come from the wind or the night air, but from somewhere deeper, like my blood had started turning to ice. I forwarded it to Michael with a short subject line. First warning? He replied with just 3 words. Maintain radio silence. I understood. The game had shifted. It was no longer me versus them. It was the law versus the lie. But even in that, I remained silent. I didn't speak to the press. I didn't post a single thing online. I didn't tell Sophie, the only cousin who still called me Claire without that pitying look. I lived each day as if walking on glass. Every step had to be deliberate. Every word, if misspoken, could shatter the entire surface beneath me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, but I still woke up each morning, brewed tea, opened my laptop, and watched the storm unfold. No one called me Little Claire anymore. No one asked if I'd had breakfast, but no one had the right to silence me either. I kept Uncle William's message saved, like a flickering candle I placed beside my bed each night, not to light the way, but to remind myself I wasn't completely alone. Because sometimes a gentle voice in the dark is enough to keep you from turning back. I was sitting by the window, a lukewarm cup of tea in hand, eyes following the slow rhythm of pedestrians below when the doorbell rang. At first, I thought it might be Sophie, maybe another batch of scones or a handwritten note. But when I looked through the peephole, my heart constricted. Standing outside were Richard, Margaret, Caroline, and Rachel Stevens. I didn't open the door right away, just stood there, spine stiff, breath caught. I didn't need to guess why they were here. I took a deep breath, turned the lock, and opened the door. The four of them stared at me. Not a single smile among them, just cold expressions and calculating eyes. My father was the first to speak. Claire, we need to talk. I stepped aside but didn't invite them in. We can talk out here, I said evenly. They exchanged glances. No one objected. Maybe they knew. The door hadn't opened for family, but for the last flicker of politeness I still owed them. We gathered around the small wooden table on the balcony, just enough room for four. Rachel stood off to the side, avoiding my gaze but not leaving. My mother spoke first. This is going too far, and I believe you don't actually want to hurt your family. I met her eyes. This family hurt me a long time ago, Mom. She flinched, barely, but kept her voice composed. What's happened may not have been perfect, but taking it public will destroy everything. Our name, the legacy, the company, everything your grandfather built. And I'm supposed to stay quiet for that? I asked. Caroline cut in. Claire, you're acting like you're the only victim here. Do you have any idea how many people depend on Morgan Capital? Hundreds of employees, shareholders. You think they don't matter? I let out a dry, bitter laugh. Funny you bring up employees, because for the 3 years I worked there, not once did you treat me like one of them. Richard looked at me then. No shouting, no orders, just calm, deliberate words. Claire, I won't deny, mistakes were made. But the way you're going about this, you're pulling the whole family down with you. If you're willing to reconsider, we can make this right. You can come back to the firm, an executive position. We'll say it was all an internal misunderstanding. I stayed silent. He continued, you'd have your own team, your accounts reactivated, all records of this gone. All you have to do is agree. And in return, I asked, eyes locked on his. He narrowed his eyes slightly. There's no in return. This is your chance to come back to the family. This time, I actually laughed. Just a short one. Not bitter, not mocking. Just the kind of laugh that escapes when you've heard too many empty promises. Everything you've said has one thing in common, I replied. Image. Not one of you asked why I did this. Not one of you asked if it hurt, if I was scared. You just want me back as a brushstroke in the painting you've curated for yourselves. Rachel stepped forward, her eyes meeting mine for a flicker, then quickly darting away. Claire, I know you're angry, but you can still stop this before there's no way back. I looked at her, the person who once held my hand through panic attacks, who once promised she'd never be like them. You chose their side a long time ago, Rachel, I said, calm but sharp like a blade. The day you stayed silent in that meeting when the payroll numbers were altered. The day you took the project that was mine. The night you sat at the Thanksgiving table while I stood outside the front door. She lowered her head, silent. Her hair fell forward, hiding the eyes I once trusted more than anyone's. I stood up. I'm not a victim, and I'm not a traitor. I just chose to stop pretending. My father looked at me, face unreadable. You don't know what you're up against. You're wrong, I said. I know exactly what I'm up against, and I'm ready. I turned away. They understood the meeting was over. No goodbyes. No parting words. That night, Uncle William called. His voice was steady as always, but this time lower, tighter. They're holding emergency meetings. Someone on the board is suggesting that if you won't back down, they pin everything on you. Say you acted alone, unauthorized. I closed my eyes. I figured, do you have enough to protect yourself? Step by step, I said. I kept every email, every access log, the original versions of the altered reports, and internal memos, Caroline's signature authorizing the wire transfers. William sighed. They're desperate, Claire, and the more desperate they get, the more dangerous they'll be. I nodded, even though he couldn't see. Thanks for telling me. I'm not doing this for the family, he said, pausing. I'm doing it because the truth deserves to exist. For the first time, the Morgan blood in my veins didn't feel like a stain. I hung up and sat in silence. This family, the one that raised me on rules about honor and integrity, was now dismantling those very ideals with their own hands. But I wasn't afraid anymore, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for them to save me. I had saved myself with a courage they never taught. Monday, 9 o'clock a.m., the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission held a live press briefing. No names were mentioned, no faces identified, but anyone who'd ever worked under the Morgan Capital roof knew exactly what storm had begun. I sat in my small apartment, laptop screen lit up with the live stream from the SEC building in Washington. Michael had texted me an hour earlier. Say nothing. Watch it through. The spokesperson, a woman in a gray suit, face composed, stood behind a forest of microphones, speaking as if she were giving a weather report. Except the words she used carried the weight of a hurricane. We have initiated a federal investigation into several financial entities suspected of concealing offshore transactions, establishing shell corporations, and deliberately falsifying internal financial reports. She paused, looked directly into the camera, and delivered the final blow, including a long-standing family investment firm headquartered in Boston. No one said the name, but within minutes, the financial web lit up. Morgan Capital was everywhere. Stock prices began to slide. Related funds pulled their press releases, pulled their investments, closed their accounts. A world that once stood like an impenetrable fortress began to fracture. I didn't feel triumphant. I just sat there, hands clasped together. Part of me still remembered the image of my father sitting in the library, reading the paper, my mother arranging flowers in the living room, Caroline adjusting her hair in the mirror, and Rachel, the girl who once split a chocolate bar with me during a 10th grade recess. But today, they weren't family. They were subjects of an investigation. They were part of a system that had tried to cast me out for choosing the truth. I remembered Caroline's last call the night before. Claire, you don't know what the media will do. They'll dig up everything, your past, your failed projects, your personal life. Do you really think you can survive that? I answered as calmly as I could. You think I haven't considered that? A long sigh on the other end, cold and proud, as always, when she realized she could no longer control me. I'm not the quiet little girl standing behind Dad's chair anymore, I said. I'm Claire Morgan, and if you need to cut me off to keep the family clean, then I'll be the one holding the knife. She didn't respond. The call ended, and now their silence had become the loudest echo of all. By that afternoon, the story had spread further than I ever imagined. CNBC, Bloomberg, even the New York Times. For the first time, Morgan Capital was not a name of praise, but of scrutiny. My apartment felt sealed off from the outside world, silent still, except for the rhythmic clicking of my keyboard as I sent more documents to Michael. Updates, notes, supporting details, anything that might aid the investigation. Around 6 p.m., a call came in from an unknown number. The voice on the line was deep, cautious. Claire Morgan? Yes. This is Alex Dean, investigative reporter at the Boston Globe. We've heard you previously worked at Morgan Capital and may be connected to the ongoing investigation. I don't need you to confirm that, but if you're willing, I'd like to speak with you. Not about the numbers, about the people. I didn't answer right away, because in that moment I realized something. This wasn't just my story anymore. This was the unraveling of a system built on legacy, wealth, and silence. And maybe, just maybe, the voice of the one person they once forced away from the table would be the one that flipped the whole table over. I'll think about it, I said, but if I talk, I'll tell everything. He paused, then said, "That's exactly why I called you." Later that night, I called Uncle William. "I've seen the news," he said before I could even speak. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel," I admitted. "That's okay, Claire," he said softly. "Not everyone gets the privilege of seeing a rotten power structure from the inside, and fewer still have the courage to stand against it." I sat by the window, looking out at a city glowing under its own quiet conscience. "I'm not that Morgan girl anymore," I whispered. "You never were," he said. "You're just finally becoming who you've always been." A few hours later, I received an email. No subject line, anonymous sender, only one sentence. "They won't stop. Be careful." I shut the laptop, slowly stood. I knew there would be no clear skies ahead, only more shadows, more threats, more carefully calculated moves. But just like every step I'd taken to get here, I wouldn't turn back anymore. Because the truth doesn't need a spotlight. It only needs someone who won't deny it. And for the first time, Claire Morgan, the woman who was once turned away at her own family's door, was about to walk through every other door, on her own 2 feet. 3 months after the press conference, the name Morgan Capital, once a symbol of financial dominance in Boston, was no longer displayed on the front of 181 Beacon Street. The old sign was removed in silence, replaced with something simpler: Cyprus Ethical Investment Group, a quiet attempt to cleanse the ruins of the past. Richard Morgan, once hailed as the old lion of Wall Street, was officially found by the federal court to have engaged in gross financial opacity and knowingly approved fraudulent transactions. The sentence: 3 years probation, financial penalties, and a lifetime ban from serving on any financial board. But the real punishment wasn't written in the judgment. It lived in the eyes of the financial world: handshakes withdrawn, magazine covers pulled, and a reputation built over 40 years collapsed in the coldest winter of his life. My mother, Margaret, no longer appeared on the covers of philanthropy magazines. The cocktail parties stopped. The admirers who once surrounded her at every event disappeared, twice as fast as they had once praised her. Caroline, the once untouchable sister, was investigated internally and quietly exited the company under the label of misalignment with future strategy. But she didn't sue. She didn't protest. She simply left Boston a week later. I heard she went to Belgium, where she once studied a semester of corporate governance in college. No one knows what she'll do next. I didn't ask. Some silences between sisters aren't meant to be patched. They're meant to be lived with. I didn't expect to say yes, but I did. When the newly formed board, under SEC supervision, offered me the role of head of ethics and internal transaction oversight, I accepted. They needed someone who didn't just understand the system, but had once dared to challenge it, and I wasn't afraid anymore. On my first day back inside the building, I stepped into the main lobby, where my father's portrait used to hang. It was gone now. In its place stood a white panel bearing the new organization's code of ethics. I stood in front of it for a long time, not out of smugness, but because I needed to ask myself, have I really moved on? I thought maybe not entirely, but I was walking forward, step by step. I had my own office now, not large, not extravagant, but bright, and more importantly, mine. No longer a gift laced with control. I no longer felt the need to prove myself. Now I worked with people who once saw me as the rebellious daughter, and they listened, truly listened, not because I carried the Morgan name, but because I had survived the storm they thought would bury me. Caroline called me in late April. I didn't answer right away. Her message was short, but it held two words I had never seen from her before. I'm sorry. We met in a small cafe near the harbor. No bodyguards, no cameras, just two women who had once been forced to compete, now sitting across from each other, surrounded by the smell of coffee and strangers who had no idea who we were. She didn't justify anything, didn't shift the blame. She simply spoke, slowly, about what it felt like to see her name on an official inquiry, to watch our father collapse into his chair during the hearing, and most of all, what it meant to realize that all those years of being the perfect daughter had built nothing but an empty circle. I thought you would fall, she said, meeting my eyes. But you're the one who kept this family from sinking completely into the dark. I didn't say you're giving me too much credit, because for once, her words weren't manipulation. They were recognition. I didn't forgive everything she'd done, but I no longer hated her for it. We didn't hug, we didn't cry, we just sat there 10 minutes longer, like two people quietly remaining after a funeral. And in that silence, something new began. Not the sisterhood our family had scripted for us, but a relationship between two women who had once lost themselves and somehow found each other again. As for Rachel, she didn't call, but she came. It was a Saturday afternoon when I saw her outside my office door. No warning, no message. She held a small box of pastries, the kind I used to love in college. I opened the door. Just a minute, she said. I nodded. Rachel looked at me, her eyes glassy. I was scared, not of the truth, but of what I'd lose if I stood beside you. I didn't respond. She went on. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I was a coward, and I regret it. I looked at the pastry box. The scent of warm baked dough still lingered. I forgive you, I said quietly, but I can't let you come back into my life like before. She nodded, softly. No begging. We stood there, the hallway silent, the breeze outside brushing past. I wish you happiness, Claire, she said, and walked away. I didn't call after her. I didn't reach out, Because sometimes the best thing you can keep is a clear boundary. That night, I went home to my little apartment, the place that had witnessed my lowest moments. I placed the pastry box on the table, poured a glass of wine, and turned on the music. Then I picked up my journal, something I hadn't touched since this all began, and I wrote, "Not everyone wants to hear the truth, but when you finally dare to speak it, the world, no matter how hard it tries to ignore you, will have no choice but to listen." I don't know what tomorrow will bring, and I can't say everything is okay. But I know one thing: I didn't fall, and in the ashes of a family that once believed itself invincible, I found something they never taught me: dignity and freedom. I used to think there would be a moment of clarity, a bell ringing, a light flicking on, some clear sign that the journey had ended, that the wounds, the resistance, the loneliness had all reached their final page. But no, the end doesn't come with noise. It comes quietly on an ordinary day. A Tuesday morning, soft sunlight, cool breeze, and a stillness in my chest, like I no longer had to grip onto anything just to stay upright. I left the Cypress building at exactly 5 p.m. that day, holding a few documents, a draft for a new ethics policy I intended to present to the board. I wasn't there to protect a name anymore. I wasn't there to prove my worth. I was there because I believed if anyone deserved to hold the light over the past, it should be someone who had once been swallowed by it. Sophie met me on the curb with an iced coffee in hand. She's a freelance contributor now for an independent financial journal, the first to write a public article defending me even before the investigation began. "There's an invite from Yale," she said with a soft smile. "They want you to guest lecture on ethics and transparency in business." I laughed. "I'm the last person who should teach anyone about ethics." She shrugged. "That's exactly why they need you. You've lived inside a system that had none, and you chose to walk away." I didn't answer, just nodded slowly. Maybe, sometimes, scars are the most honest lessons. I returned to Beacon Hill one last time, not to reconcile, but to close a chapter. The old house stood empty. My family had moved on. No forwarding address. I stood before the wooden door that had once slammed in my face, where I had once stood trembling, carrying a cold pecan pie and a broken heart. I touched the doorknob, still locked, of course. No one answered. No one expected me to return. But this time, I didn't need anyone to open the door. I slid a small envelope through the mail slot. Inside was a single handwritten line: "I forgive you, not because you need it, but because I refuse to carry this anger another day." I didn't sign it. They'd know. And I walked away, lighter. A week later, I left Boston, not to escape, but because I had finished my part in that city. I moved to a quiet coastal town where I could hear waves through the window, where no one asked where you studied, what you did, or who your parents were. I opened a small office, just enough to consult on communications for nonprofits, trying to do the right thing in a world that so often doesn't want to hear it. And sometimes, on slow afternoons, I bake pecan pies. Not for anyone, just because I love the smell of browned butter and cinnamon warming the air. Every time I pull one out of the oven, I think of my grandmother, the only one who ever looked at me without judgment. She didn't leave me wealth, no grand philosophies, just a handwritten recipe on a yellowed piece of paper. And maybe that's the greatest inheritance I could have received. I wrote my first book the following fall. The title was simple: Don't Open the Door If You Don't Mean the Welcome. It wasn't a takedown, not a revenge piece, just a collection of the things I once feared, the things I lost, and what I found when I stopped trying to be accepted. Some called me brave, some called me foolish, some called me a traitor. I didn't argue. I didn't need to, because I finally knew who I was. I am Claire Morgan, no longer Richard Morgan's daughter, no longer a shadow behind someone else, no longer the woman knocking on doors, begging to be loved. I am my own person, and I walked through the final door, not to ask to be let in, but to walk out, free. If you've ever been dismissed, if you've ever stood outside the door of your own family, feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice deserves to be heard. And if you believe that the truth, no matter how bitter, should still be told, subscribe to the channel and stay with us, because sometimes it's the ones forgotten by the world who carry the loudest truth.